said, we will be recording. And I forgot to say, but you might have assumed Jill had a conflict tonight, couldn't be here tonight, so she left things with me. But I'm pleased to introduce our guest tonight, Collin O'Mara, who I think probably the vast majority of you know already, as if nothing else, when he was head of DENREC for Delaware, before moving on to becoming head of the National Wildlife Federation, hence the blanket, whose blanket was it? Sharon's blanket, membership gift. And now, well, we're going to learn more tonight about Collin's role leading the MACH2 effort, obviously. And some of you I know were on the Sierra Club webinar a few weeks ago on the same topic. I wasn't able to make that one, so I'm really pleased to be able to, you know, hear what Collin is going to let us know all about tonight and have questions. And I'm sure, you know, I could learn more, as some of you were on that call as well. So we can always learn more. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Collin, and we'll hold question and answers for the end.
Yeah, thanks, Dee, and it's great to be with all of you. Hopefully my video is okay,
Yeah.
and the audio. I want to kind of go back a couple years and there's kind of two pieces I want to kind of bring together at the beginning of the conversation just to kind of frame it up. The work that so many of you did over the last couple of years to get House Bill 99 passed, which obviously sets, you know, really big targets in terms of how we're going to achieve reductions, but isn't particularly prescriptive, right? It's kind of like, you know, we got to figure it out, and obviously we're working on different plans to do that. You know, if you look at the Delaware energy mix, if we're going to decarbonize, you know, the vast majority, about 80% of the emissions that we have today across the state can be electrified. So this is things like the residential sector, right? Moving towards electric appliances, right? Trying to, you know, move away from fuel oil or natural gas appliances. You know, the commercial sector, right? Most of the processes inside buildings can be electrified. Small vehicles, you know, passenger vehicles, school buses, you know, things that can charge, things that can afford the lighter weight of the kind of lighter weight batteries, and, you know, can deal with some of the range challenges. And then there's kind of some other pockets that are harder to decarbonize, right? We think about, you know, things like the ag sector, right? You can electrify some things, you can electrify some of the equipment, you can electrify some of the processes, but, you know, there's some places where, you know, we're going to need different kind of fuel switching to cleaner sources. You think about the manufacturing, the industrial sector. You know, there's some things that you can electrify. Again, there's some things that you can squeeze out through energy efficiency, but there are some areas where, you know, it's just, again, it's hard to get at those, you know, last emissions. You know, when folks talk about different technologies, some of which are pretty unproven. You think about the heavy transportation sector. So, you know, the 18-wheelers, you know, the semi trucks, some of the marine vessels, some of the the passenger buses that are running all the time. You know, they can't go down for 4 hours to charge again to get back on the road. And so, you know, I want to kind of tee up the conversation that way, because the biggest opportunity that we all have in Delaware to decarbonize the state is still kind of a combination of efficiency and renewables. Like, that has to be the most important thing, right? And so, like, the work on the RPS, the work on offshore wind, the work on solar, the work that the SEU is doing, I mean, like, that is all absolutely critical. But there is this other piece, right, that we have to figure out how to decarbonize. And as you were all working on HB 99 in the state, on the federal side, there have been kind of a series of conversations, starting with the Energy Act of 2020, which created this Hydrogen Hubs program, the infrastructure bill in 2021, which actually funded that program, and then a kind of a series of tax credits that were part of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. And what I saw kind of across the country was that the natural gas community, kind of broadly across the country, kind of saw the hydrogen incentives and the various programs as a way to kind of put more and more incumbent infrastructure on the ground all across the country. And so conversations popped up in Appalachia immediately with like frack gas. Conversations popped up in Pennsylvania around the same thing, around throughout the kind of southeast, into the Gulf, you know, into the Dakotas, into the Permian Basin, and places like Texas as well in the middle, and some of the plain states. And what we kind of quickly saw was that there were very few proposals that were coming forth in the hydrogen space that were focused on green hydrogen, if you will, kind of renewable powered based electrolysis. And I'll go through the science just kind of really briefly. I know I've had a chance to talk to some of you about this, but 99% of the natural gas in this country today comes, sorry, 99% of the hydrogen in this country from today comes from natural gas. It's taking the CH4 molecule, the methane molecule, and blowing it apart through steam methane reformation to basically break apart the carbon, which then leads to carbon emissions from the hydrogen molecules, which then kind of creates two H2 molecules. And then that's used to power factories, it's used to power all kinds of equipment. At the same time, there's been a competing technology for a long time, and that's electrolysis. So instead of using natural gas as the feedstock, instead using, sorry for the background noise, instead using water molecules. So the H2O, right, and separating the H2 from the O. And so instead of having the carbon be the kind of the off, kind of the pollutant kind of emission, right, you have water vapor, the O molecule. Now this raises a lot of questions, right? Like, how do you power the electrolysis? How do you make sure that the water use is minimal? That you're kind of, you're not wasting water in any kind of way, especially in like water-starved parts of the country. But compared to using frac gas that's got emissions at the wellhead and think of the extraction process, emissions at the distribution system, emissions again at the point of use, and then the point of reformation to kind of create the hydrogen molecules, and then carbon emissions when the actual molecules are used. The kind of the green system that we're trying to focus on doesn't have any of those emissions, right? So you're using renewables, so either solar or wind, ideally using that to power electrolysis, which again is not a fossil fuel. There's no fossil fuel at all. Again, it's a process where you're basically using a membrane to basically kind of can use the energy to kind of blow apart the H from the H2 from the O molecules in the water. And then so you have some water vapor off gas, and you have the hydrogen itself that you can use for different purposes. And what I saw in 2001 and 2002 was that the Shell oil company, the big Conocos, the Chevrons, all those folks were kind of proposing these massive kind of natural gas-based hydrogen plants all across the country. And so we began a conversation trying to figure out, like, could we do it with renewables here? And then there's this kind of question around nuclear and kind of new nuclear versus old, and we'll get into that. But could we credibly put forward a proposal that had no natural gas at all in it, and no fossil fuels at all? Basically saying that, like, we think we can do it with electrolysis instead of the steam methane reformation, which has been the normal process. And so we started putting together the pieces of an application. Now, at the time, this was kind of crazy. There were 79 different communities that were putting together proposals across the country. We knew they were going to fund somewhere between 4 and 10. They ended up funding 7. But every round, because our application had no emissions compared to others, especially things in like Western Pennsylvania or West Virginia or other things in the region, because we had a proposal that was entirely kind of worked on with labor unions. So they're all project labor agreements. So the labor piece and the workforce pieces were strong. Because there were an opportunity to displace a lot of existing criteria pollutants in the corridor, which kind of in the 95 corridor, kind of up through 295, thinking about like the Route 9 corridor in Delaware, the 495 corridor, like all those industrial facilities from Delaware City to Newcastle to Wilmington up to Claymont, because there's an opportunity for at least some of those to stop using the heavy kind of dirty fuel oil 6 or diesel or natural gas that are powering them today, and switching those to hydrogen. Creating significant air benefits, whether that's particulate matter like PM 2.5 or PM 10. Thinking about things like the opportunity to reduce the amount of mercury, or the amount of just turn the light off on me. The amount of mercury, the amount of sulfur dioxide, reducing the NOx significantly. There still are some NOx if hydrogen's combusted. It's little, but there's still some that have to be captured. And then not having any of the carbon dioxide or the methane emissions that these systems currently have. And so the way this process worked, and it's kind of crazy, and I can go through slides if people want, but basically they asked us to pull together projects from suppliers and some folks that would produce hydrogen, and then folks that would use hydrogen, to kind of show that a marketplace could exist. And the challenge that we had is that we had to be able to show that we had a kind of like zero emission electrons in the near term to help power some of the electrolyzers. And so it's easy to make that case for solar. Like, you can site solar in a couple of years. You got to work with the PJM interconnection, but there's a way to move solar fairly quickly. The big piece of renewables for this region, though, is going to be offshore wind. And with the challenges in New Jersey, kind of lack of activity in Delaware, kind of questions around interconnection around Maryland, and then obviously no involvement, very, very little involvement so far in Pennsylvania. There wasn't really a kind of a clear path to show, 300, 200, 300 megawatts worth of nameplate capacity, at least, of renewables in the near term. And so then the conversation turned, okay, well, where do we show that we can have, at least in the first 5 years, 6 years, where could we have cleaner electrons coming from? And one of the only other options at that point, if you can't do it all through solar and you can't do it through offshore wind yet, is looking at nuclear coming out of New Jersey. Now, this is problematic, right, on a bunch of fronts, because we've had issues with the water intake for years. We've been unable to kind of move that. The feds have never been willing to step up. States may try to do different things and never kind of get the job done. The courts have been a mess. And so trying to figure out a way to not kind of chain ourselves to a technology forever, right? But at the same time, show that we have enough electrons to create the hydrogen that we want to repower buses and factories, kind of led to some, a lot of discussion. And it's frankly a conversation that's happening right now in the federal government, because they're trying to figure out what kind of technology suite should count for different levels of incentive from a tax credit that was created through the Inflation Reduction Act for hydrogen. And it's an interesting tax credit because it's based on the carbon intensity. And so, if you have no carbon emissions, you're supposed to get $3 a kilogram. If you have, if it's like a blue hydrogen project with capture that may or may not work, it's 50 cents or 56 cents like that. So they kind of this big range of incentives. I give you all that background because there's a context to trying to figure out how do we do this in the right way. Because what I'm seeing across the country is the hydrogen that a lot of folks are proposing is going to lead to a lot more kind of natural gas pipelines, a lot more methane emissions, a lot more carbon emissions, and being done in a way that's really not sustainable. And at the same time, I'm also seeing a whole lot of uses that don't make sense because they can be electrified. So, in this region, like I really am trying to make sure that we're focusing on two particular areas that I think are hard to electrify. The first one is heavy transportation. So this is things like SEPTA buses, things like, marine vessels, potential aviation eventually, things that just you can't, at this point at least, use batteries for because of the kind of the storage density and the range that we're looking at. So like, and I'll give you a perfect example. So we should absolutely electrify all of the school buses, right? You can charge them overnight, you can run them in the morning, you can charge them during the day, you can run them in the afternoon, and then charge them again, right? It makes perfect sense. Like a DART bus, for example, that's running for maybe 15 hours a day and can't be down for 3 or 4 hours, hydrogen probably makes more sense. So again, there's kind of these examples of different kind of technological applications. And so trying to find, so that's one sector. So the first one is kind of heavy transportation. The second one is around industrial. And when you think about some of the greatest environmental injustices in Delaware, a lot of it are facilities that are primarily running on fossil, they're all running on fossil fuels, right? And just the amount of fossil fuels that, some of which have been reduced, but none of which have been eliminated. The amount of pollution that folks are experiencing, particularly particulate matter and sulfur dioxide and NOx. If you look at our rates of childhood asthma, you look at our rates of cancer, you look at a lot of the different challenges that we're facing on the health side. I mean, almost all of it can be pointed back either to the transportation sector or to the industrial sector. So again, trying to focus on those places where hydrogen can uniquely help solve the problem because they're not easy to electrify. So again, that's kind of the context. I do see the notes on the side about maybe showing a couple pictures. So let me share my screen and I'll pull up some.
Pictures worth 1,000 words. Although you explain things well, but graphics might be good for some folks, including myself.
Yeah, let me just pull up a couple slides really quick. And some of this is going to be redundant with what I said. Hold on one second.
While there's a pause, Collin, can you turn down the speed of your speech? It's a little hard for my ears to keep up with you.
Oh. Shoot. Sorry, I'll try to turn the. Let me see if I can ramp the RPMs down a little bit. Give me just 1 second. I'm trying to find the stat.
In the meantime, if you do have a question, oh, there we go. You can throw it in the chat or save it till the end, and we'll take verbal questions at the end. You can just ask it, or if you don't want to forget it, throw it in the chat. And knowing Collin, he can multitask and answer as he goes along.
So let me just kind of jump around this deck a little bit. So on the environmental justice side in particular, I wanted to share these maps because I think, and we're going to update these. There's some good conversation today about how we need to kind of have different layers. But these are like the first one's from the EJ screen, and looking at, so this is the one all the way on the left with kind of the blue on it. And if you look at the places, I hate this term, but the feds use this term of kind of disadvantaged communities, really should be underserved or overburdened. But if you look at where we have where we have communities that are historically and currently facing just disproportionate levels of pollution, a big chunk of that right along the 95 corridor, right? So as you're like looking through Wilmington, through starting in Newcastle, the work of the Newcastle Prevention Coalition, thinking up through Wilmington, up through Claymont. Claymont obviously is less now because of the steel mill closing, but historically, obviously, that was one of the greatest sources of environmental injustice in the state. Kind of going up through Chester, kind of working our way towards South Philly, and then kind of both sides of the Philly. So where the refineries are, like in the Monroe refinery, where the PES refinery used to be, kind of up through Paulsboro. And then on the north side of Philly, right, you have more and more of the industrial facilities. So some of like the steel operations, some of the cement operations, and again, same thing as you head up towards Camden and through Trenton. So if you kind of thinking of this corridor in particular. And then the second map is looking specifically at like where we have the particulate matter hotspots. And I focus on particulate matter a lot because this is one of the it's not just a precursor, it's one of the greatest causes of childhood asthma in particular. And if you look at that spot, and one of the darkest regions in the entire country is the same area, right? So this is coal plants in Pennsylvania. This is the amount of truck traffic coming through 95. This is the steel mills, the cement plants, the refineries. If you downscale it, right, you'll see the same thing in Delaware. And then looking at kind of where potential demand is, in things like cement and steel and chemical plants and refining. Again, it's a lot of those same facilities are along the 95 corridor, along the Delaware River. A lot of them have too much water kind of usage. So again, trying to think through if we're going to use hydrogen, how do we use it in the places where you absolutely need it, which again, is kind of a limited footprint. It's not residential, it's not commercial, it's not some of these other things people are proposing. It's none of that. Like most, that doesn't make sense. Like I have grave concerns around blending. I don't think the pipeline infrastructure was designed for it. I'm not sure we can have confidence it's going to be safe. There's a big conversation about that in New Jersey right now. It hasn't yet come into Delaware, but I think we've got to be extremely skeptical that any existing infrastructure is sufficient. Anything that's moving hydrogen should be either re-sleeved or should be replaced. Again, because I just think the safety issues have to be of paramount concern. So if you look at this from a pure kind of criteria pollution reduction strategy, the opportunities are significant. We've already talked about the production, but basically, again, it's using renewable energy to then power an electrolyzer that's then separating through a membrane through an ion kind of process to separate the water molecule, so the H2 from the O, storing it or distributing it in some way, then using it for kind of very specific purposes. The hub that's kind of the application before DOE that we're working right now to get released from DOE because there's like some business information we're trying to convince some of the partners that we just have to redact a couple things, but this has to become public very soon. So I'm working hard on that right now. I actually raised it with the deputy secretary who was in Delaware today. But almost 80% in the out years will be from renewables. There is this kind of piece around nuclear that we're still trying to sort through. The goal, some more of that would be the advanced nuclear if that comes together. But I think there's a lot of concerns about what that looks like. But that's closed loop systems, recycled material, not having kind of the problems of some of the legacy pieces. And I'm confident that like the demand that we're talking about isn't high enough to make or break the kind of the plan or the anticipated shutdowns of some of the other facilities. So I think it's something we can discuss. But I think there's, I don't think hydrogen is going to be the bridge that keeps older systems that probably need to be heading towards decommissioning online. I don't think that's going to be the case. But I think it's something we should be mindful of. In terms of what they look like like it's not a plant. And so there's been these questions about like, oh, there's gonna be a big plant in Delaware City. That's actually not what we're talking about. So if we were talking about natural gas, that's absolutely what it is. You see these massive systems, these big, these big steel operations. This is basically the size of the back of like a semi truck. So, it's 40 feet long, it's 12 to 15 feet wide. And you can stack them, you can kind of like, lay them out of different areas. So this is enough for 1 megawatt of electricity to power. And then this would produce about 1 kilogram a day. And so there's these kind of interesting conversions. So like in the case of Delaware City, like what we're trying to do, and I appreciate the question around the zoning, because like that proposal never should have been part of that. First of all, that package is ridiculous. The idea of 87 proposals in one package, I think is just, way too much and not the way we do things. But I actually personally asked both the refinery and the county to pull any rezoning in Delaware City out of that process completely. I think it was, I don't know who asked for it. I mean, I've heard different stories, but there absolutely should be kind of public discussion and a lot of community conversation first before they get to the point of going to the county and asking for rezoning. So, but this is what the biggest footprint at Delaware City would be solar. It would be taking, a lot of some of the existing lands that are already contaminated, some of the lands where previous facilities have been, kind of raised, but there's still, concrete on the ground, and turning turning a lot of that to solar. I'm also trying to make sure we're not kind of covering, some like the farmlands on the south side of 9, and it's like going into like the Dragon Run area. So there's some kind of cool ecology. You can see like American bitterns and a bunch of kind of cool species that you can't see in many other places in the state. And so, we should be focused on existing contaminated lands, existing brownfields, landfills, for solar. But so imagine Delaware City, imagine, some number of these. It could be, in the dozens, or it could be in the low hundreds, and then kind of surrounded by solar in a lot of different places to power it. So, I mean, that's kind of the idea. So it's not another plant. And then the only emissions from this would be the water vapor, right? That's being expelled off. There is in the electrolysis, and I want to be just honest with all of you, in the electrolysis process, there are some that have a small amount of PFAS in there. None of it gets emitted, but I think that one of the things that I've been pushing on the University of Delaware to work on is figuring out ways to not have any. Like you can keep it completely closed loop. None will wind up in the water supply. None will wind up into the air. But there's really no reason at this point to have that. So so again, there's on the emission side, there's nothing in the process itself that leads to emissions other than water vapor. There is some PFAS in the process that we have to make sure it does not leak out of the system. And then if they are combusting it, there is a small amount of NOx, and it's less than using fossil fuels, but there is some that we have to capture. So that's the emission profile, but you're looking at, 1/100th of what, you have today from the status quo technologies. Just a couple others. So on the MACH2, maybe I'll answer this and kind of get into questions in just a second, Dee. But, you have, the role of the universities and the researchers, the role of labor, the different innovators. There's a lot of innovation. We have some of the top researchers in the country. I mean, just like we have some of the top, offshore wind experts in the country, and folks like Willett and Jeremy and others at the university. We also have like Yushan Yen and several folks that Dr. Prasad talked, and is obviously in that group as well. Some of the top experts in the university on the hydrogen side and the fuel cell side. And so again, thinking about how we take advantage of those incredible academic researchers, and it's not just in Delaware. I mean, the folks at Drexel, the folks at Penn, the folks at Rowan, there's an incredible amount of work going on at Cheney University, which is the oldest HBCU in the country. It's outside of Chester. Lincoln University is another HBCU, Delaware State, of course, and then all the technical colleges, and then also think about the workforce opportunities that come from connecting all the pre-apprenticeship programs to get folks ready, the apprenticeship programs with the building trades, all the programs of the Workforce Investment Board. So there's an entire kind of opportunity to create just significant jobs for the community. And I'll get to another slide, but it's 20,800 jobs is what's being estimated. And so these are ways to help transition folks away from dirtier fossil fuel jobs. These are ways to be able to bring folks in some of these frontline communities that have been, have faced the burden of legacy pollution for generations, and make sure they're training. There's some really cool skill training programs that like the Newcastle Prevention Coalition and like the Claymont folks and others are working on right now. So trying to connect all those to their career opportunities. So again, a lot of opportunities for job creation. And then think about the demand side. So things like DART and SEPTA, thinking about, some of these industrial facilities, the ones that, we want to be able to sustain themselves longer term. But again, trying to kind of get the ecosystem right. The projects themselves, and again, so we were asked for kind of preliminary projects from DOE. There's supposed to be community conversations around all of these. And so it'll be kind of project by project. discussions. Some of the facilities have different kinds of advisory boards and community councils and community advisory committees. Some don't. But over the next year, a big part of the process is having these community level conversations, trying to figure out make sure the projects make sense. Making sure that that there are no fossil fuels being used, making sure that that there is support from the local communities, making sure that siting and land use decisions are collaborative and have community support. So that's not going to be an easy. That's not going to be a near-term process. It's not going to be an easy process. It's not going to be short. But the next 12 to 18 months is really just planning and conversations. So no one's going to see shovels in the ground tomorrow. No one's going to see things being kind of jammed through legislative processes or through not. We should not see it, and we should stop it if they try. So again, the idea is to have a very collaborative process. So some of these. So in the case of, let me focus on the Delaware projects. It's probably better for this group. So the biggest source of green hydrogen will be at the Delaware City refinery using those electrolyzers I just showed, largely powered by solar, eventually hopefully powered by offshore wind. There's an interesting project proposed by Chesapeake down in Georgetown, and I got to give them credit because they obviously came in with an interest in the natural gas space. We said absolutely no natural gas, and they said, well, what if we use solar on this 30-acre parcel they have to power electrolyzers to then convert their fleet, hopefully convert some ag fleets, and then also use it as a southern fueling station for DART. And there are also some other kind of potential applications on there, some of the chicken trucks and some of the other things that could potentially convert to hydrogen over time. But those are kind of the two or bigger production kind of opportunities in Delaware. There's some others that are a little further away. One company called SHIP, another called First State Hydrogen, that are more in the development phase right now. Versagen's got some kind of really great technology too. So I think there's other opportunities for production from kind of UD-led technologies. Then on the use side, one of the places that wants to kind of get rid of fossil fuels on their Wilmington facility is the DuPont Experimental Station. So they'd like to convert to renewables and hydrogen. There's been conversations about using hydrogen, of course, to kind of reduce the emissions further at the Delaware City refinery. There's preliminary conversations about some facilities that I know folks on this call have concerns around, like Crota and some of the others in Route 9, on the Route 9 corridor, or kind of going up through like Hay Road. So again, opportunities, and I think if we can prove that the process is safe, that the movement is safe, and that the price points are as cheaper than the fossil fuels they're using right now, we're hoping that several will convert to using a zero emission fuel instead of the dirtier fuels that they're all using today. And then I talked a little bit about the workforce side. This is a lot of skilled labor, and so it's all the building trades. The opportunities for building kind of the next generation. More than 10,000 folks in the construction industry, as a stat I heard today, are in Delaware, are over 55. So it's a way to bring a lot of young folks in. The building trades have been historically not particularly diverse outside of Lyona, and a little bit with the steam fitters. It's a way to diversify the ranks. If we create these kind of pathways, and there's been kind of good conversations and leadership by like LEAP, which is kind of a great group that Larry Lambert and a lot of others are involved in, trying to create those pre-apprenticeship programs to apprenticeship kind of pathways, like the FAME program in Delaware, which is trying to get more kids in school and excited about STEM and then having those career pathways. There's a lot of different kind of programs like these, but again, connecting them in so folks are apprenticeship ready is going to be really important. And then also looking at the universities, the HBCUs and the community colleges. There's just a lot of opportunity for folks to have jobs that can both kind of do good and also kind of do well for their families and create more pathways to the middle class. So that's kind of the goal on the workforce side. Dee, that was a ton of information. Why don't I pause for a second? I'll breathe for the first time in 20 minutes, and we can just kind of get into a discussion.
Sounds good. You want to take that slide down? And there are a couple questions in the chat, and if anyone has an additional question, why don't you raise your hand and we'll go from there. Do you let's see. Stephanie had a question in the chat about the NOx, and let you take that and think about it for a sec.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of reading at the same time. So the we can show the math on the underlying assumption. Yeah, so there's been, so on the NOx question specifically, there's recent studies that are showing that some of the early estimates related to hydrogen and NOx were kind of 40 times overstated because of the assumptions. Um, let's kind of get into the math, because I think some of the early studies looked at the NOx across the entire value chain, going back to the point of extraction and fracking all the way through combustion, as opposed to just the combustion piece. And again, I mean, I think there won't be any SOx, won't be any mercury, there won't be any particulate matter, but I think the NOx is the question. And so I'll share what we have, but I'd love to get more input on that. And EDF's doing some good work on that as well right now. They're doing some kind of deep research, because it was hard to separate in some of the earlier modeling. It was hard to separate like the methane emissions and like the carbon emissions from the NOx emissions, and figuring out like what came from the hydrogen versus what came from the underlying fossil fuel. Particularly if the steam reformation was on the same kind of site as the actual combustion. So, and that's one of the issues with some of the old refinery processes here. They're kind of in the same place. So, yeah, I think it's a conversation that we have to have, because we can't afford to have a precursor for smog and for asthma. So absolutely. How is it promised? So Amy's question. I think that's fair. I mean, like my goal with Bloom was always to have it running on biogas or on hydrogen, right? It was never supposed to run on natural gas in the long term, and I lost the fight. So I mean, I own that. I mean, that's on me. I mean, I think the emissions are still a lot less than the coal plants it was replacing and some of the other gas plants. But it's I think the difference here is that we're not looking for any kind of state subsidy or anything else. I mean, the context is a little different, because we were trying to figure out how to save manufacturing jobs after the auto plants closed in 2009. But I think part of it is just having better accountability, and better kind of tracking of the commitments that are being made by the companies. So I think there are lessons learned, and ideally, some of those fuel cells can be converted away from natural gas towards cleaner sources if we have the fuel source that's actually a zero emission option, a zero greenhouse gas option compared to the natural gas right now. So I mean, I'd love to convert those all to hydrogen, if that was possible. So the Holtec point is a good question. So not a single shuttered unit is being proposed for kind of reuse. There's a project by Holtec. Holtec's a company that does like in kind of utility scale solar, and they're also in the advanced nuclear space. They had a project that they were proposing to locate where the Oyster Creek nuclear facility was because of the transmission. It's also one of the places where New Jersey's looking at putting offshore wind kind of connecting to the grid. And the offshore wind interconnection piece is an issue we should all talk about too. There just aren't a lot of places we can physically connect, like Indian River's one, because as Unit 4 finally comes down, which I thought I shut it down 4 years ago, and it's still, PJM kind of restarted that unit even with the controls. But there's only a couple places where we can actually, kind of bring offshore wind ashore. And so that Holtec project is already coming out of the proposal. And there's others that are kind of falling out either because of tax issues or technology issues. So again, this is kind of a work in progress. But yeah, we will absolutely not be proposing restarting any nuclear. And as I mentioned at the top, I mean, I want to make sure that this is not the reason that any existing units continue. I think that's really important, because it's also going to crowd out, as we're trying to bring more offshore wind online and renewables to meet the Jersey goals and the Delaware goals. Let me see. Oh, Peggy's question on offshore wind. Excuse me. I mean, look, the vast majority, 90% offshore wind is going to go to decarbonize the residential sector, the hopefully power electric vehicles. Think about commercial uses. There's two different ways to think about producing hydrogen with offshore wind. One is having the electrons come ashore and then using a small portion of them for hydrogen production. There's some European models that are actually doing it at the site of the turbine. And now the problem with that is I don't love the idea of trying to move it from the turbine to the land. Right. I just think that it creates a whole bunch of questions that I don't think we're well equipped to manage right now. The federal regulations around like offshore oil and gas are a disaster. The idea of like having them regulate that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So the idea would be that as these transmission lines are coming ashore, just as a portion hopefully going to be used by municipal utilities and universities and the state and by the different utilities, that there's that just a portion of the offshore wind electrons would be used for hydrogen to run the electrolyzers. And I think there's a big debate right now in DC around, it's called 45V, it's the tax credit. And it's like, how do we show that the electrons are actually going towards the project and aren't just like displacing other electrons on the grid that then lead to peaking natural gas units or or even worse, peaking oil units coming online to make up for the power that's being diverted. So I think like we should keep talking about this, but my preference would be to have just a small portion, 5% of the offshore wind production going towards hydrogen production as a way to kind of meet both goals. Let me pause there for a second, Deke. I can keep kind of going through all of them, but let me just see if there's, that was just a lot. I can answer just attempted to answer the first 3 or 4. Hey, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you for that. Hey, I appreciate those answers. You just touched on a question that I have or at least I think you touched on it, but I was wondering if you could put a finer point on it for me. So you mentioned not wanting to just displace electrons that are already in the grid. And I think what you were talking about there was if we divert power to use to produce hydrogen that's already producing other uses, commercial, industrial, residential, then doesn't that create, a need for some other plant, presumably fossil fuels plants, to run more for peaking or other purposes because you diverted a big portion of that energy? I think that's what you were talking about there. Can you say a little more about how is all of the energy that you're envisioning for MACH2, is it all new renewable energy?
I mean, my goal is that within 5 years, it's all new, right? I mean, the challenge we have is that with the PJM interconnection backlog being 4 to 5 years, right? Like we have to actually get the renewables on the grid. So, because like, we could build, 200 megawatts of solar in the next 2 years, right? Now, getting that connected to PJM, could take 2 years after that. And so, the proposal that I've made to the administration is like within 5 years, no hydrogen in this country should be produced without new renewables powering it. But for me, like in this region, right, like we can do solar fairly quickly, but offshore wind, we're still 4 to 5 years out. With the implosion of the Jersey contracts with Ørsted, you're going to see, not to bring bad news, but like the project with Shell are going to be the other project that Shell's involved in is likely going to fall in the next few weeks. And so, we're going to need a big regional conversation on offshore wind that we should also be talking about. That includes, Jersey and us and Pennsylvania and Maryland. And if we have a new governor and, Virginia in a year and a new 2 years and then a new governor, and potentially some new partnership opportunities in Pennsylvania with their new governor, kind of thinking about the region. But I think it all should be additional. I'm equally concerned that, our emissions in this country went up 3.6% last year. And one of the reasons was that we didn't actually bring enough renewables online to offset the increase of electrical demand from electric vehicles, right? So like this is additional need, right? We're going to need to power vehicles as well. So Stephanie, I think it's a both and, but I think in the near term, like I want to get as many additional renewables on the ground to power our grid as possible, recognizing still Delaware's importing 50% of our power. I mean, like the enchilada for us, right, is getting offshore wind right. Like that's the ball game for electricity. Solar can be 0.5 gigawatt or maybe 3/4 of a gigawatt, but offshore wind could be, 1.5 gigawatt, 2 gigawatts that we're potentially even a net exporter if we do this right and do it in partnership with other states.
Can I piggyback on that, Collin? Sorry, because I kind of have the same question. So I'm not trying to be redundant, but just trying to understand all this. So I understand. So you're saying basically, we might not be fully green in this department for 5 years, but the goal would be to have, let's say, the wind, or is the goal, it's a question, not a statement, for the wind energy supplying this green energy plant to be a dedicated line. In other words, not just feeding the grid and you're quote unquote buying energy off the grid, so to speak. I think, Steph, that's kind of what I'm hearing from Stephanie.
Yeah,
and
so
is my question as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way this is going to work, and again, this is why we need to have these conversations. I think folks are going to buy the attributes for the first few years, right? So they're buying RECs, they're buying, some kind of fear that the attributes of that renewable power is coming from a certain renewable source. That doesn't solve the additionality problem that Stephanie raised.
Is
right?
100% possible in the day one for
Of
green?
of the attributes, yes. Yeah. I mean,
100%.
yeah. I mean, like you could offset. Yes. Yeah. You could, there's enough RECs out there at a reasonable price that you could buy, partially because a lot of the states around us don't have particularly good RPSs. And so there's a oversupply of RECs, right? I think where my head's going, I'm not sure, and I love what Willett's take on this. I'm not sure that like a dedicated line is going to make perfect sense, but I think power purchase agreements that are basically like with the companies where they're not just pulling off the grid, which would then be displacing, but really saying like, look, you know, US Wind is planning on putting, you know, 700 megawatts in a project. We want 70 megawatts committed to this. We're going to sign PPAs for that 70 extra that's above and beyond what would have been done anyway, as opposed to just buying it through the PJM grid, right? So you have that, so you're really committing, so it is additional to what would have been otherwise. But I also don't want like spaghetti kind of in terms of transmission all across everywhere, kind of each individual project, because every one of the transmission lines goes to a community, right? And so there might be more efficient ways that don't, because what I'm afraid of, right, is the same kind of environmental injustice as you create in pipelines, right? We put it through the paces that are the least resistant. And so you can see the same thing happen again if we're not smart about transmission.
Do you want to go to Frank or?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so is there any way to tie this in? I know you're looking at dedicated sourcing and you need reliable production for your customers. But is there any way to use this, or is there any thoughts about using this to sort of levelize out in a bigger sense production from when we get overproduction? Because we're going to have to overbuild renewables to meet our needs. And rather than shut down turbines or not collect the energy from solar, is there enough? It seems that this would be a way to store the things that are off the grid, and then there's savings to wind producers and other producers to not have to curtail.
Yeah, no, Frank, it's a great question. And like, there's actually this kind of interesting storage opportunity with hydrogen. So if you're bringing, so say you're using electrolysis to do renewables to power electrolysis and creating hydrogen. Like there are times when you can then use the hydrogen running it through the fuel cell in the other direction to create electricity. Now there's an energy loss, and there's a little bit of loss in there, right? So it's not a perfect like one-to-one translation, but if you think about when there's an oversupply, converting it to hydrogen, having it in a safe, steady state, and then putting it back on the grid when you need it is an actual opportunity. And so it actually reduces some of the storage needs to kind of balance. And I think if you did that, plus like the vehicle to grid technologies we've been talking about, plus some other things, there might be some kind of smart applications that avoid the need just for massive battery farms for storage. So I think the answer is yes. I think, it's easy to talk about theoretically. No one's really done that yet at scale. But I think, if you had storage capacity between, within kind of newly constructed infrastructure, and had this ability to kind of go two ways, I mean, it gets pretty interesting pretty fast. So, yeah, and also deals with just the intermittency, right, of some of the, especially of solar, right? There's ways to kind of bank some of the hydrogen and use it later if you need it to kind of balance the demands of the load. So, Sally, let me jump to you.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. I've heard some concern about any leakage of hydrogen getting into the atmosphere and combining with methane to somehow extend its life. Is that a valid concern?
Yes, it is. I mean, I think, look, it's a small molecule, right? I mean, the folks that are proposing like blending hydrogen into like residential lines, and they're like, oh, it's only 5%. Like the potential for leaking is significant, and it is. I may have to switch to a different phone in a second. So if you lose me, I'll switch applications. The fear that I have is that there's an assumption that existing infrastructure is sufficient, and it's just not true. EDF's done some great looking at this. I mean, the potential for hydrogen to be a kind of an accelerant, especially for near-term warming, is pretty high. And so, I mean, I want to make sure that we're not moving any hydrogen molecules through any pipelines that aren't either brand new or completely re-sleeved. I think we owe it to residents. I mean, the residential applications make no sense to me, like from a cost point of view, from a technology point of view. But I think this is one of the hard conversations. Like we should not be relying on any older infrastructure for this at all. And so, yeah, your point is extremely well taken. And Frank, I think it's something that we could model the right way. It is going to make the costs higher, but I mean, that's worth it every day if it saves, reduces emissions and, doesn't put anybody at risk. So, I mean, I think the risks are low, but I think we have to be, we need to do everything to, build from scratch and not reuse 50-year-old systems, in all parts of the country.
Thank you.
So there are a lot of, okay, there's a bunch of questions. Let me see. Okay, hold on. Let me get Peggy's question on nukes. Yeah, so John, I think I tried to address that same question with Sally's. That's the key. I mean, the key is like the new infrastructure, new pipelines, all kinds of new storage, just not using existing systems, not using existing tanks. So I mean, I think that's, the supercharging methane question is a big one. Sarah's question about the 20,000, no, it's not, they're not all permanent. So there's 14,000 construction jobs and then like 7,000 permanent jobs. So it's there's it's the 7,000, and that's not just Delaware, that's across the full region. So that's that. Amy will share I'll share the deck. I'll share that with Dee and with Jill, so then they can share that with everybody. Those are the maps. And again, they're tentative. So they're just kind of based on where the kind of early projects were considered, and those are evolving pretty quickly. The H2 question about Charlie about it being small, absolutely. So so making sure that the system can handle the pressure, because I just don't think a lot of existing pipelines are set up that way. There's a question around efficiency. So it's basically a megawatt in to get a kilogram out, to get a ton out. Sorry. And so I'll share all the math. But it's a relatively efficient. The electrolysis conversion is more efficient than the steam reformation conversion with some of the new electrolyzers that are being proposed. It wasn't always true. But I mean, the conversion losses are relatively small compared to what you see in some of these other kind of big natural gas facilities. We can share more information on that. The timeline to get all this built, permitted, running. So and this is an 8 to 10 year build. I mean, it's a pretty long process. So I mean, I think the goal is to have the next year and a half just being conversations like this, and the kind of conversations at the project level, getting into permitting, discussions. I think there are questions around, the Clean Air Act and the minor source regs, and kind of thinking through making sure the regime makes sense. I'm not convinced that a lot of the steam methane reformation projects that were put in place over the last decade in the region went through kind of the right level of rigor. So I think that's a conversation we need to have. And I know Senator Hansen and the administration are already beginning to think about that. So but this first year, right? First year to 12 to 18 months is all going to be about community engagement at each of the locations.
With that, Collin, with that in
Yep.
mind, sorry, before you move on, I know there are people on the call that were concerned about the rezoning aspect, and you touched on that. And I think everyone understands that Ordinance 23083 is going to be proposed to County Council with that, the rezoning of the Delaware City parcel removed from it. And you touched on, how you agreed that it didn't make sense the way they went about doing that. But what do you see as the future for location? Do you see that parcel as a possible parcel being considered, or are there other parcels? Where in Delaware do you see this as an appropriate location?
Yeah, I mean, on the Delaware City side, I mean, the part along like the northern part of Route 9, right, along where they need to make the wastewater upgrades as well. Like if they're going to, if a lot of that area is that area is already, not particularly pristine to say the least. Like that's a great place for solar. I think there's some places around some like the dredge spoils, right? That could be solar. Some of the old parking capacity. So there's some things around like the tank farms that could be solar. Some of that infrastructure could actually come down to make room for more. I'm not a big fan, and I think we ought to have more conversations, but I think the lands like south of Route 9, the stuff that's they can run right around Dragon Run, some of those farm fields, not just the ones, and Emily, I can't remember the street name. It's shoot, I can't think of it. There's like farm fields on kind of both sides, but particularly the farm fields on the south side, they're leased out right now. Like let's keep that pristine. There's really no reason that needs to be developed. So I just think kind of thinking through, kind of before we look at any lands that have, kind of existing habitat on them, let's start at the paved areas, the degraded areas, the landfills, and then go from there and see what else is needed. But I just think there should be a hierarchy. Look, and this is a bigger conversation. I mean, I think the fact that we have a bunch of developers across the state proposing solar projects by cutting down no, we don't have any old growth left in Delaware, but we have some like second and third generation, kind of forest stands that we shouldn't be cutting down to put solar down. So, I'd love us in a position where we're basically saying, look, until you can basically have the burden be that you have to prove that there are no parking lots, landfills, rooftops available before you jump to any kind of natural environment. And I
Please.
think we can start that here.
Yes,
We could run that
do
in the county.
We will have that as a subsequent conversation.
There's a
How to make
hierarchy,
that
right? Mark asked about the 501c3. Yeah, so the 501c3 has been filed. The 1023 has been filed to my knowledge. I don't think it's been fully approved yet. So we can, we don't have any revenues yet. So there's there's a handful of donations from some of the partners just to kind of fund the application. But we can share I think we can share the 1023. So yeah, we can get back to you on that. Yeah, and then the board is kind of under development right now. So we're in negotiation with DOE. The concern was that because we want some of the universities on the board, but because they're receiving money, there's a question on independence. And it has to do with what's the right, the inurement kind of clauses of nonprofits. So like, I'm not taking any, I'm not receiving a dime. Like, I'm not being paid. I'm not doing anything. I'm there as a volunteer, kind of board member. There are some other universities like University of Delaware that are receiving funding to do either trainings or do some work. And so we're trying to figure that out.
Drew Slater, hopefully we didn't lose Collin completely, but Drew, you had your hand up. I want to make sure I get your question in.
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment
let's make sure Collin's here.
Okay.
Did we lose Collin?
He said he's got to change phones.
Yeah, he might have to call back in on a different machine. I'm not sure. I just want to make sure he hears your question. It says he's still here, but we'll make sure he can hear us. Uh-oh. Okay, he's not here right now. Hang on, everyone. Hopefully he'll be back. There we go. Collin, are you back with us?
I am. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, you're
Sorry. I gotta pick my daughter up at Banner in just a second.
Okay. Drew Slater had a question for you if you can.
Sure. Hey, Drew.
Hey. On PJM, I presume that you've had a lot of conversations with them. I mean, they have 40,000 gigawatts through the queue that's not built of renewables, which is about 25% of a peak day. And so, with offshore wind or really any renewables, we have to have interconnection reform at PJM for really any of this to work, right?
Yeah, and you and I should talk about this because I just think we have talked to PJM and they're looking at the 4-year becoming a 5 or 6 year backlog for interconnection.
It's 6+ right now.
Yeah, it's just a killer, and this is where, like, to Stephanie's question, right? We of course want everything to be additional, and we have to be able to get it online. And I think a lot of these projects are going to require the ability to sell into the grid like occasionally, right? I mean, I don't think anyone can run like a microgrid for one of these projects and make it economical. So I'd love to strategize with you on that, but it's a bigger reform conversation about the PJM in general.
Yeah, yeah, it's 6+ years right now, where ERCOT is 3 because of their connect and manage. So it'd be nice if PJM would reform.
Yeah. B, could you do me one favor? Could somebody just capture the chat? Because I want to be able to respond to folks. Maya, I'll absolutely reach out to you. It actually didn't get to me, so I'll reach out to you next couple of days. So thanks for that. No, and I apologize, it hasn't happened yet. That's ridiculous. So I will handle that.
I will save the chat. And Collin, did I hear you say you've got to go?
I can do it for another minute. I just got to figure out my daughter in just a second. Sorry, I got an 11-year-old that's going to be freaked out in a couple minutes.
No, you're good. I don't want to make you late for that. So there are so many questions in the chat. I know we won't get to them all. I think what we'll do is try to have Collin back again, maybe as he described, this process is probably a 2-year process anyway, at least, I would say. So we'll try to have him back again. And I'm sure there will be other opportunities, Sierra Club, others that will have him and other folks talking about this. I know Delaware Riverkeeper also had a session lately. So there will be plenty more sessions, I'm sure, for people to learn more. And we'll get the slides out to everybody. This recording will be up on the Plastic Free Delaware YouTube channel. And I'll try to I'll save the chat and get that out to you, but I know that's a lot to ask. So anyway, we really appreciate you being with us tonight, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Talk soon.
And
Appreciate everybody.
wish everybody a happy holiday and see you in the new
Happy
year.
holidays.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Colin.
You.